Hello, everyone. So Venus is currently stationing, and the Venus retrograde journey begins today/tomorrow. I've been spending a lot of time tuning into this cycle. I actually wrote a 12-page article that I'm going to divide up and send out in my newsletter over the next month or so. So what I'm going to do in this video is give attention to just a basic overview of the various phases and movement of this Venus retrograde cycle, and then teach specifically on the meaning and the evolutionary intent, the quality of the journey that comes with the first phase of this Venus retrograde cycle as it's moving retrograde in Aries. There are a lot of really interesting nuances, so I'm going to start by just giving us an overview of the cycle. Before we do, I want to make sure everyone knows tomorrow, Saturday, many of you watching this will have missed it already, but the recording will be available. We're going to be teaching a class on Venus, sexuality, and evolution. This is myself along with some of my evolutionary astrology colleagues, hosted by the Association of Evolutionary Astrologers. This is an intro to an upcoming Venus class series that we're all going to be co-teaching. We'll be teaching Venus through all of the signs over 6 months. So in this free intro, we'll just be delving very deeply into the Venus archetypes, focusing specifically on our own relationship dynamic, sexuality, and how that relates to our ongoing soul evolution. We're not going to be afraid to go there to really speak to some of the deeper, challenging content that we all face on this journey. So check it out in the description. And again, if you missed the talk, you can get a recording. So check it out on jwgaea.org. And as always, my first-year training program is open for enrollment. This is an opportunity to study astrology from a soul-focused perspective from the bottom up, available for those that are totally new and those that are already deeply studied but want to start from the very beginning from a soul perspective. I write articles along with these videos, so this entire Venus series will have a lot of written teachings. These articles are a way of me chewing on and digesting the content. And as always, I offer sessions for individuals, couples, and long-term soul-to-soul companionship sessions. Everything in the description below. Okay, let's get started with a basic overview of this Venus retrograde cycle. All right, so Venus stationed retrograde at 10 degrees Aries, right there with the moon as well. So keep your eye on Venus as we progress this chart forward through the days. Just short of 2 weeks later, we have the first of our eclipse in the eclipse season. This is happening at 23 degrees Virgo Pisces. So what's really interesting to note is we basically have a Venus retrograde eclipse sandwich. You can say Venus stationing retrograde and Venus stationing direct are the pieces of bread, and the eclipse is the peanut butter and jelly. So this Venus retrograde basically sandwiches this entire eclipse season. And that's really profound and meaningful to contemplate. Consider that eclipses are portals through which a lot of karmic energy moves in and out, right? There's a lot of acceleration and fundamental change that generally takes place during eclipse season. And in the same way, the Venus retrograde cycle is also a very deep transformative journey. Venus moves from being an evening star, goes within, completely dark. You can't see Venus for several days, which itself represents this internal process of healing and strengthening and clarifying our own inner relationship to ourselves. There's a lot of deep internal transformation, and also in our relationships, that happens during this phase. And then Venus begins to kind of renew itself as it reemerges as a morning star. So this entire cycle is holding this eclipse season. And there are some really other interesting notes to bring forward. So let's continue to bring this day by day. Keep your eye on Mercury. So just a day or so after the eclipse, literally just a day, Mercury stationed retrograde. This is amazing because look at where Mercury is stationing retrograde. It's actually happening pretty much at the same degree that Venus stationed retrograde. So to add to this, Mercury and Venus are both moving retrograde in the context of this eclipse season. And Mercury is basically going to accompany Venus the entire time. And since Mercury is a lot quicker, Mercury stationed retrograde after Venus stationed retrograde. And Mercury, as we'll see, will station direct before Venus stations direct. but they both move from Aries to Pisces. So we can almost creatively think of it as, Mercury is the messenger that's accompanying Venus. And I'll be definitely teaching more on this in the future, but just kind of consider this intuitively for a moment. Venus is the psychology of listening, how we listen to others, how we connect with our own inner reality. Whereas Mercury is the physiology of hearing. This is a Jeff Green quote, right? How Venus is like the active relational listening quality, but Mercury is more of the data orientation, information, data, how we're organizing our framework of reality. When you combine the two together in this very internal retrograde phase, in the context of these eclipses, isn't it intuitive to interpret that there's going to be a lot of essential communication, a lot of new thoughts, a lot of information that's going to be important in shaping our own understanding of ourselves, what we're doing, what our values are, and really helping clarify the right way in our relationships. It's just a very rich and informative time period for a lot of essential learning and changes in our life. Okay, so let's continue to move this forward. We're approaching the Kazimi, which is the midpoint of the entire Venus cycle, happening at 2 degrees where Venus is joining the sun. And soon thereafter, Venus moves back into Pisces. And this is sort of like phase 2 of the Venus retrograde journey. Right? And again, Mercury follows as well. So we have Mercury and Venus both in Pisces, and Venus basically conjuncts all of the planets. Now, this is highlighting not just the eclipse dynamics with the nodes in Virgo Pisces, but the strong evolutionary activity happening with the Saturn North Node Neptune configuration. So I'll definitely be unpacking that a lot more as we progress throughout this Venus cycle. And progressing it a little forward, basically Venus stations direct right there next to Saturn. And so there's a very deep, contemplative, introspective, grounding, but practical, like what are you going to do about it? There's a gravity to the closure of this Venus retrograde cycle. And then Venus will move forward and move over Saturn, North Node, meet Neptune in Aries, move over all of these points again. So this is April 12th where Venus stations direct. We're in for a few months of just really profound and essential change. I don't think it can be emphasized. A Venus retrograde cycle is always really interesting, right? We're always going to find a lot of essential inner change, getting to know ourselves, clarifying and refining our own values, self-value, self-esteem, self-worth, knowing ourselves from a deeper place within. And of course, it's always going to speak to our relationships and the people showing up, and greater clarity and refinement and healing of karmic dynamics within our relationship. Seeing this Venus retrograde cycle happening where it is, with the strong Pisces, with this Mercury, with this eclipse, just promises a very interesting and profound transformative journey. All right, let's delve now into the specific meaning of this current Venus retrograde. I'm going to start by offering a general framework for how to understand Venus retrograde in general. What's the evolutionary meaning of this retrograde archetype? And then focus specifically on Venus retrograde in its first phase through Aries. And I'm going to be reading from this newsletter that I'll be sending out and kind of riffing on it as I go along. So, as a general rule, Venus stationing retrograde means that our Venusian function, how we listen to and relate to our own inner reality, our inner beloved, how we tend to the inner garden of our soul, as well as how we extend ourselves into all kinds of relationships, all of this is beginning to undergo a profound change. We look at the themes of value on all levels. What defines my own sense of self-value, my self-esteem? What is it that we value most in our lives? What do we value in relationships? And the essential question, when do we compromise for the sake of harmony and balance in meeting other people's needs? Versus what are our essential fixed values that we absolutely cannot ever let go of, right? And really the question, how do we know when to compromise? How do we know when not to? How do we know which one is true? Right? This is a big part of navigating the Venusian journey. When to give, when not to give. When to hold the boundary, when to be more compromising and available and flexible. The challenge with Venus in general, and this is kind of why these things can often be confusing, is often the issue of possessiveness. We get attached to what feels good. The people, things, and experiences that make us feel a certain positive way easily become commodified as the people, things, and experiences that we believe we need in order to feel that way. On the most gross level of consciousness, Venus has a lot to do with our basic biological impulse for survival. This means that we are wired on the most primal basic level to move towards pleasure and away from pain. And yet, really, we are not here solely to operate on a primal level of consciousness. As Venus stations retrograde, many of the fixed values and attachments that we've established in our lives begin to loosen up. This includes how we relate to ourselves, what constitutes our sense of self-value, as well as the expectations and projections we place on our relationships. And this is why that dynamic of when to say no, when to give, or I could be available for this, or no, this is an absolute no. Sometimes it feels way too relative. And that can be a challenge in Venus, where we go to these extremes of, not being available enough or being too available. And we find this balance, but the whole journey is essentially refining, where does my value come from, and what is it that I truly value? If we're holding on to a fixed idea of where our sense of esteem and value is sourced, we might get stuck into a relationship patterns where we allow other people or ourselves to be commodified. Right? Well, I have to give this because I need to be liked, and being liked and wanted means I'm valuable. Or we're needing other people to give and treat us in certain ways, and so we have very fixed needs, fixed values, and we're demanding the outer world to meet us according to what we've decided we are worth. So then on the one hand, during a Venus retrograde cycle, we just might be loosening up many of our expectations and demands of how ourselves and others are meant to show up, where our values have become overly fixed, and thus we're not really allowing for a growth and greater discovery to take place. We begin to consider, how do I feel? What do I really want? What can I let go of? What is balanced? And this discovery of balance is so rich and meaningful, because the journey of balance with Venus is one of authentic self-discovery. We learn balance. We get into relationships and we explore these various roles and extremes. And if we're open to learn, if we're really willing and desiring harmony, if we're desiring balance for ourselves, for others, within our relationships, we're going to actively pay attention to, how does that feel for me? How does that feel for you? What kind of adjustments might be needed? And that willingness to make adjustments often pushes up against, but it's supposed to be this way, or I need this to happen, or I need to be this, or I need you, right? So it's very rich, very intimate. Within our relationships, we open the doors for more authentic and non-attached communication to allow for a more open-hearted exchange of listening and learning. Sometimes the only thing that blocks true intimacy is just the lack of listening. We may not want to hear what is true for another, because that would mean our value associations of what we wanted them to be may not work out. Likewise, we may also not listen to our own inner voice, the inner beloved, what is actually right for ourselves for this exact reason. So Venus retrograde promises a deep reevaluation and potential for true healing in all things inner and outer relationship. Now, as always, there's always deep relevance for who's showing up during a Venus retrograde cycle, right? As Jeff Green often taught, we pick up from where we left off. So relationships will be showing up and either taking particular turns to reveal specific karmic dynamics that need to be integrated. Pay attention to who's showing up right now in your life, as well as just old relationships from the past. And it's not always like a person shows up. Sometimes it's the energetics of a person, right? You'll remember things. The way in which these dynamics are resolved aren't always 100% through a literal human-to-human experience, although it very often is. Just to pay attention to who and what kind of relational dynamics are emerging in your field right now. It's incredibly rich. Now let's tune into the specific meaning of this Venus retrograde through its first phase in Aries. There are a few things that are important to highlight. So Aries as an archetype fundamentally needs freedom. The essence of this need for freedom is the need for personal experience. I need to have the necessary freedom to make the choices that I need to make in life in order to further my own evolutionary growth. So Venus retrograde can be really highlighting, am I affirming my needs? Am I making the choices that I need? This can express in two ways. One, if you tend to be the kind of person that is generally overly accommodating, meaning you don't have a very strong relationship to the Aries archetype, You're not going to assert your needs and your will. You'll deflect more. You'll be orienting more around what do others want? What do you need? Then this retrograde might bring up a strong feeling of being stifled. There might be anger. There might be a sense of, I'm not moving or adequately embracing the necessity for self-leadership in my life in the ways that I know I need to. And so this retrograde is really calling us to tune into, how do I feel? Is this working for me? What choices do I need to make? What communication do I need to enact in order to progress my life forward? And that might be hard, right? It's Venus retrograde in Aries says other people may not agree or want the same thing as you. But if we're not valuing our own life and our own soul, and if we don't have that leadership and that ability to say, this is who I am, this is what I need, then there will be no balance. There will be no true harmony in any of our relationships anyway. Now, it's important to appreciate Mars right now is just still picking up speed. Let's actually look at the chart briefly to get a sense of this. Mars is still at the same degree that it was when it stationed retrograde a week ago. Mars isn't even going to enter Leo until the very end, after Venus stations direct. So this entire time, while Venus is moving retrograde in Aries, Mars in Cancer, and it's interesting because Mars rules Aries, Mars in Cancer kind of already embodies that Aries Cancer archetype, Mars being a part of the Aries archetype. It's growing in intensity. So it's very clear right now that we can understand this Venus Aries as a strong focus on that learning of self-leadership. But one of the challenge could be the attachment to security and affinity, right? Mars Aries needs freedom, Cancer wants security. I need to make choices, but I don't want separation. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to hurt myself. I don't want to be insecure. And I think that's one of the tensions that many of us might be toiling with and exploring right now in our lives. Now, the other dimension to this Venus retrograde is the opposite. If you tend to be more demanding and assertive, this is what I want, these are my values, this is what I need, this is how I need you to treat me, this is who I want other people to be, this can be a frustrating time. Because Venus retrograde will be slowing down. I mean, just remember, Venus is like literally at this moment, from a geocentric perspective, not moving. So there's a deep internalization. Ooh, I'm not getting my way. I'm not getting to where I want to go. Life and others aren't conforming to my demands. And that might be an invitation to connect with feelings that we haven't accessed. When we become overly dependent upon the external world and external relationships to accommodate to our needs, there's a dimension to which we've never really formed the necessary self-intimacy to truly know ourselves. And again, relative to that Mars in Cancer, this might bring up a lot of old, early emotions, right? One dynamic of that Aries-Cancer relationship is this deep, permeating vulnerability. Children feel strong emotions. They don't know what to do with it. They'll have a strong emotional experience. They'll need to be held. But as adults, we can face that, but not know how to nurture and cultivate intimacy, or to ask for what we need, or ask how we can be supported, or how to create the healthy kinds of experiences to support us to actually move through our emotions. So there just might be really strong emotion that we absolutely need to face. Now, I want to offer this perspective, since I'm speaking about children. As a parent, this is something that I'm very present to. We train people how we want them to treat us, right? And this is, I think, a very useful point of reflection as we move through this, especially as we move into the second phase of Venus and Pisces, right? I'm very excited to talk about that. We train people how we want to be treated by way of how we respond to them. So when I'm with a child, and I've had many personal examples, right? I want this. I want some extra screen time. I want an extra piece of cake or whatever. If I say no, and my child really, really wants it, they might escalate. They might scream. They might cry. They might get very angry. They might get very violent with their words, with their energy. If I stick with my no, but then at some point I cave in, what am I teaching them? I'm teaching them that if they get angry, if they put up a fit, if they express a violent, strong, mean energy, they're going to get their way. So I'm training them that they can do that, and I'm training them to learn that they can treat me that way. If I give them a no and I stick with that no throughout the entire process, I am certain their emotional intensity will pass, because it always passes, right? They just need to know that I'm here. I'm not leaving them, but it's a no. What they want is a no. They're not going to get their way. They are not going to get their way, right? That intensity will pass. The next time this comes around, they might have the same experience, and then they might have the same experience a few more times. But at a certain point, they learn, this is going to get me nowhere. And what is it that they're learning? They're learning self-intimacy. I'm disappointed, but there's nothing that I can do about that. I'm disappointed. I'm not getting what I'm wanting. How many of us as adults are good are skillful at not getting what we want? Right now, again, the other dynamic is completely true as well. We can train others in the very opposite way. If we're going to be very assertive and demanding and sort of offer this very conditional love, do this or I'm going to be angry at you, we teach other people to not listen to themselves, to not be in touch with their feelings and with their body. And thus, in the same way, we don't really give them the chance to get to actually know themselves. And then as adults, we're looking on the outside. Who do you need me to be? Who do you want me to be? So I think with this Venus retrograde in Aries relative to this Cancer Mars, there's so much looking at our own internal security, learning to become more of a leader in our own emotional self-care, our own self-knowledge, and how we consciously bring that forward into our relationships. So this is my basic energetic overview of the core dynamics of this Venus stationing retrograde in its Aries phase. The keywords that I would use here are self-trust, self-leadership, courage to individuate, courage to face strong feelings and fears, and a pause before reacting, because we want to learn and see and feel and access all the vital information that is available for us. This is a truly great time to get to know what's really going inside. All right, everyone, this completes this talk. Once again, please check out tomorrow's class. If you miss it, the recording will be available. Check it out at jwgaea.org. I also taught a retrograde class series some years ago. We went in depth, like an hour and a half or so in each planet. So if you want to learn more about the Venus retrograde archetype, looking at examples in natal charts and transit, I have a class on that. I'll make sure to put that in the description below as well. All right. Thank you so much for watching.